Now what we're going to work on doing is actually getting the autocomplete functionality set up for this text box. So I'm going to jump back over to jQuery UI documentation, and I want to focus on the remote data source implementation. And what's interesting about this remote data source is that it actually utilizes the autocomplete, but it also does it utilizing a JSON data source. And JSON, you can find out more about that by going to json.org. And what JSON.org will basically tell you is it's a JavaScript object notation. And this is often how classes or data is transmitted between your application and maybe a third-party source, is utilizing JSON. So it's especially good or ideal for doing development for within a web interface or web UI, because JavaScript is spoken on the client side and it's easily interpreted. So what we need here is we need a remote data source or a website URL that we can call to that will serve up that JSON data. So if we look at our source for a moment here, we'll see that we've got some logging that's being enabled, but then here's our autocomplete where we're actually enabling for this birds text box, which is defined down here. But they're saying the source is search.php with a minimum length of 2 and so forth. So what we need to do here is that we need to implement something that's the equivalent of search.php. Now you may be looking at that and going, huh? Like how do I write search.php? Well, search.php obviously is written in PHP, so we're going to be using ASP.NET MVC instead. But the idea here is that you have some sort of URL that you call out to. It does the actual search functionality to generate the autocomplete results, and then those get sent back. So we're going to have to kind of work through how do we make all of that fit together. So let's jump back into our application. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to utilize a library within our MVC app to be able to mimic or replicate the search.php functionality. And we're going to use what's called Web API. So to do Web API, there's a lot of different options. We can just jump under controllers, we can right click, we can go add, and what we're looking to add here is a new item. And then under search, I'm going to type Web API. And we can add a Web API controller. And what I'm going to call this is, I'm going to call it my product search Web API class. So basically this comes up as a controller like anything else, but you'll notice that it inherits from API controller. And you'll also notice here that the method names are predefined, and they're kind of conventional and unconventional at the same time. You'll see here that we have the first function or first action is public IEnumerable of string, and it says get. This one is also get, it returns a single string and it passes in an ID. Post, from the form body, it takes the value. Put takes the ID and the form body value. And then delete simply takes an ID. So what's happening here is that Web API controllers don't follow the same convention as MVC controllers in that you give them a name and then that gets implemented within the URL. Instead, what happens is that an API controller, or a Web API controller rather, handles the syntax or process of /API/controller name, and then it's whatever method, and these are HTTP methods, get, post, put, delete, depending on the type of call that's being made, depends on which one of these methods gets invoked. So when we type something into our browser and we hit enter, we're performing a get. If we have a form, we can perform a post, a put, or a delete. And depending on which one of these action types we're doing, or methods, depends on which one of these gets called. So it's a little maybe confusing or unique, but let's go ahead. I'm just going to leave this template here as it is, and I just want to do a build, and let's see how it works. Alright, so up here we'll type API/product search, and we'll hit enter. And we end up with a 404. So the reason that we received a 404 error when we try to go to API/product search is actually for a few reasons. First one was actually my own mistake. Product search needs to say product search controller. It's amazing how quickly you get out of practice. So I'm going to change that here. I'm also going to change it here in my file name under my Solution Explorer. So I'll just copy and paste that. Now everything matches up again. All right. So that's the first piece. Second piece is that we actually need to add a route so that it will understand /API/product search. Now to do routes, we set up routes underneath the app start route config, and we need to add a route here for the /API. Now Web API is an interesting little kind of secondary technology that fits along with MVC, but they're not the same. They don't all work and run off the same libraries. So because of that, it is slightly different. We can't simply just add a map route. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump out to the internet and I'm going to say add web API route. And here I'm going to click on this first link and routing with ASP.NET Web API. So scrolling down through here, it talks about routing, and this is a great article. I'll include it as a reference for you to read. Just talks about routing tables, routing config, all of the work that needs to be done. But the specific piece we need is this particular route config for our API. So I'm going to copy it. And it basically goes through and talks about how we need to set up a web API config file and how there's additional functionality that we'll need in order to get things up and running the right way. But the biggest piece of it is going to be utilizing that route. And that route is really what's going to drive the rest of our application. So let's jump back into our app. And I'm going to paste this route in. Get everything lined back up. And this route, you may need to add a using statement here. For me, I've got it already loaded. It's using system.web.routing. But if you don't have that, you want to make sure you add it to the top of your file. So this is very important that you add this particular route using the map HTTP route syntax using this using statement above. Without those two pieces, your web APIs will not function correctly. So let's go ahead and save, and we'll do a quick rebuild. And then let's simply jump back to our browser and do a refresh. Alright, so we ended up getting back two values. So if you look here, we got back some XML data, so we have an array of string, and we have two values, string 1 and string 2. Now if we look at our web API itself, too far, we'll see here that we're getting back an IEnumerable, which is really an array of strings, with two values, value 1, value 2. So this code gets interpreted by the web API engine and then returns to us this XML that contains those two values. So we can go ahead and use this template for our own purposes, and we'll make some small modifications to it, and we'll be able to use it for our products. So I'm going to start out by actually removing or commenting out all of these additional actions because we're not going to use them. And then this action, I want to return an array or an IEnumerable, but I'm going to return it based off of the value that's coming into us from the UI or from the search functionality. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say string query, and that'll be the partially typed text. Now we may have to change the name of this parameter once we get into wiring everything together, but we're going to need a using statement for our DB context. So inside of our using statement, we're going to need to do a search for finding our matches. So we're going to say var matches equals context.products.where the row name starts with query. All right, so that'll give us our matches based on our query. And then what we need to do is we need to create a view model to put all of this data that we're wanting to return into. So I'm going to jump under models, view models. I'm going to create a new folder. We'll call it product search. And then we'll add a new class here, which will be our product search view model. And then inside of here, we have to just identify what product properties that we want to include. So I'm going to go ahead and actually let's expand this a little bit, and we'll say we'll start with where, and then we'll go ahead and we'll do a select, and then we'll say new product search view model. We'll add our using statement, and then we'll pass in that row, and then we'll finally say to list. Now with product search view model, we'll need to create a constructor. So I'm kind of just working through this organically. So that'll create my constructor. I don't need this row variable or this row line, but instead I'm going to say row dot, and I'm going to look at the values. So we have a description, so we can say description equals description. And you may be wondering, well, where's description coming from? And those don't exist yet. What we're doing is I'm kind of force feeding these properties into my class by copying what's here off of the row. And you'll see what I'm going to use the refactoring functionality within Visual Studio to make that work. So let's move that to the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on ID, which is getting a squiggle. I'm then going to click on my quick actions. I'm going to say generate a property. And it's going to generate that ID property right here. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'll do control dot this time and hit enter to generate the property. Control dot, hit enter, control dot, hit enter. So, oh, that's not what I wanted. I want to generate a property. So what's happened now is that by doing that, I've gone ahead and had Visual Studio imply the data type for each one of these properties based on the row data that was coming in. So this row is actually a product DTO. So I'm going to go ahead and do a rename on that as well. All right, so now we pass in the product DTO, we copy the values into our view model, and now we can take this product search view model and we can return that as the results of our search. And we're not actually returning a product, we're returning product search view model. We'll F6 that, see if it builds. And the build is successful. So now if we flip back, and we search product search of O, so we're getting an error that we've seen once before with the parameterless constructor. Guess it's just not working for us now. So what we have to do here is, instead of doing the select inline, we'll have to say matches, and then we'll have to create a list of product search view model. So PSVM, and we'll say for each var match in matches, or maybe we'll say for each product in matches, PSVM.add, and then we're just going to use this new statement. And this will be product. We'll actually go ahead and call it product DTO. Okay, so PSVM, return that now, which is our list. So basically what's happening here is we've got these matches, and it's wanting us to actually call this constructor in a different space. So we're going to have to go ahead and move things around a little bit by creating our own list, adding these product search view model items to our own list, and by simply looping through all of the matches and adding them. So it's just a little bit extra code. So now if we refresh, so what's happening here with this exception is it's saying that product search view model cannot be serialized. Consider marking it with a data contract attribute. Now the reason why we're getting this message is because our data is coming to us as XML. And if we wanted this to be handled as JSON all the time, we'd have to add some additional configurations to make sure that we're getting that JSON data. So what we need to do to set up the XML formatting so that it'll do it correctly is we have to go into the product search view model, and it's actually giving us a hint right here. It says this data contract attribute needs to be set. So we'll go ahead and copy that, and we'll put that up here at the top of our class. And we'll have to add a using statement. Now once we do that, let's go ahead and save and build. And you'll see what we have to do is we probably have to also decorate these members as well. So let's see what happens by just making that one change. Alright, so it gave us a product search view model array, but we don't actually have any values. So what we need to do now is decorate each one of these properties with a data member attribute. So we'll just add that to each one of them. Rebuild again. And refresh. And then there is all of our data coming through: description ID, name, and unit price. So we now are getting an array of that data. I don't think we have any products that all have the same name, so let's do an empty one. Empty one gives us no products, but we can change that functionality in our controller. We can simply say if string.isNull or white space for query, we'll do one thing, else we'll do a different thing. So matches is coming back as an iQueryable product. So I'm going to declare iQueryable of product matches here. And then we can take the var off. And then we can simply say matches equals context.products dot as queryable. Alright, and then we need to move this declaration of PSView model up here. And we'll rebuild and see what happens. Alright, now if we flip back here, we can refresh again, and hopefully we'll get all of our products. And there we go. Now we have all of our products. So now we have the Web API component of our application stood up and ready to be run. Now we need to go ahead and wire this into the jQuery piece and see how we can pull that data in and get our autocomplete set up.